Thanks a lot for the invitation. Great, so let me start with a situation that I guess you'll all be very familiar with. You go to a conference somewhere in a new city, and you drop your luggage off at the hotel in the morning, then you head for the conference center. Then at the end of the day, you go have dinner somewhere else, and after dinner, you find yourself having to return to the hotel, right? And that's difficult because it's a route that presumably you've never taken before, right? So I trust you'll find your way around, but I also bet that you'll have to think a bit in order to get to the hotel. And that's something we do all the time. When faced with new situations, we often find ourselves kind of pausing and thinking. And that's simply because, well, there's a limit to how far we can get with just habitual behavior. Right? There's no way we can build good habits for every possible situation that we might encounter in our lives. And so this is really a typical example of, tasks that we encounter in daily lives that have some familiar components to them. So for example, you know how to walk, and so you won't have to do much thinking to just move your legs around and stay upright on the way to the hotel, right? But there are also some very unfamiliar components or novel components to these tasks. And in this case, it's just like you've never taken that particular route to the hotel. And so to adapt to the more novel aspects of these tasks, what we do is we think. Or we plan instead of making rash decisions. And I'd say it's particularly true in situations where we need to make a whole series of decisions, like in sequential decision making, where the little decision we make now is going to have impact on every other decision we make afterwards. So what we do is we normally kind of take time to contemplate possible futures. And so, for example, here you might actually think about taking a left turn at the fork, and then imagining that, well, actually, this is going to lead to a dead end. But if I take a right turn, then later on, there will be an opportunity to turn left again, and that will get me a bit closer to the hotel. It's the sort of things that goes on in our mind when we try and find or solve difficult tasks. Now, there's a wealth of cognitive science research on planning. Things like when is it a good time to plan, or what's a good and efficient way of planning when the action space is gigantic and we need to approximate things. And overall, people seem to agree that we plan because it's rational. So thinking or planning kind of helps us to make better decisions down the road. And often that's time well spent. So we spend a bit of time thinking, and that's, we collect the reward for doing that afterwards. So for example, here, by thinking about taking a left turn, you will kind of, it will allow you to actually not take that route towards the dead end. And so you won't actually physically be walking down that street. You just cut off that branch of the decision tree in your mind, and you'll head straight for the right turn. And so this way you kind of, avoid wasting your time walking towards a dead end. And that is the same, thing for many things in life. Like normally, kind of the bad decisions are best kept virtual as much as possible. So, but there's another reason why planning is very useful, and that it allows you to kind of flexibly factorize or make use of factorized knowledge you have about the world. So in this case, for example, maybe when you went to the conference center in the morning, you've built a partial map of the city, which is maybe a completely new city for you to experience. You've built a partial map, and then at night, when you want to return to the hotel, you kind of set yourself a new goal, which is to get to the hotel. And so all of a sudden, you have a map, you have a new goal, and planning is the sort of computation that allows you to integrate these little pieces of knowledge that you've acquired about the world and to kind of integrate them to make very flexible decisions. So there's lots of reasons why planning is a good thing. And so that's all good, but at the neural level, what on earth is happening in our brain when we plan? So what happens in neural networks that form, the core of our brain power? Kind of what happens there when we pause and think? And there's been much less kind of work on that front. There's actually a wonderful review that I'm kind of shamelessly advertising here for Marcelo. Marcelo and Mathieu Lengel have written that beautiful review in Neuron on it's called Planning in the Brain. And they suggest a number of reasons why planning has been somewhat understudied at the neural level. And one of these reasons is that if you want to study planning, you want to have tasks that are actually temporally extended and that involves multiple decision steps. And of course, that's just much harder to investigate in animals. But they go on arguing that actually there's another bottleneck there, which is the lack of formally defined computational hypotheses for how the brain might plan, like the different kind of degree of involvement of different brain areas in these planning-based computations. So what I'll do today is to kind of show you that we can actually begin to use computational approaches to generate hypotheses for how neural networks might be able to incorporate aspects of planning in their computation. And we can also begin to test these hypotheses. Okay, so I'll be the one doing the talking today, but really this is 99.9% the work of Chris Jensen, who's actually tuning in, I believe. Wonderful PhD student in my lab, though sadly not for very much longer. Well, he will continue to be wonderful, but just not in my lab anymore. So he pretty much came up with everything that I'm going to show you here today, from the main ideas, the conceptualization, the implementation of all these things, the data analysis. And it's been a collaboration as well, which I've very much enjoyed with Marcelo Matar, who is responsible for the other percentage. So Marcelo has worked extensively on planning, so he knows a lot about these things. And he recently moved his lab from UCSD to NYU. And he actually happens to be hiring postdocs and PhD students. So just, I would very highly recommend you get in touch with him if you like what you see today. All right, so the first thing that Chris did was to design a flexible navigation task, like one of these tasks that presumably kind of require planning in humans. So what I'll do is I'll first spend some time describing the structure of the task, and then I'll show you how humans solve the task, what we discovered about kind of the patterns of thinking in humans during this navigation problem. Then I'll go on kind of describing Chris's network model for sequential decision-making in this task, how he was able to incorporate aspects of planning. And then I'll show you some key predictions that this network makes, which Chris was able to confirm in hippocampal recordings. So that's roughly kind of the outline of the talk. So what's this task? So each episode of the task is characterized by a maze with a bunch of walls, which are these white walls there. There is a goal hidden somewhere, which is the green dot. And the goal is not visible from the agent, okay, by the agent. It's just hidden somewhere. Now, the agent has to start by exploring the maze and make it slightly more interesting by having cyclic boundary conditions. And at some point, the agent will come across the reward. And at that very point, that initiates trial number 2, where the agent is randomly teleported somewhere else and has to return to the same hidden goal. Okay, so there's an initial phase of exploration where the agent has no clue where the reward might be. And then there's a phase of exploitation where in trial 2, in every subsequent trial, the subject will return to the reward again and again and get teleported again and again until the agent runs out of time for that particular episode. And that's 20 seconds in this particular setting, okay? So the agent is going to have to very rapidly adjust its strategy upon finding the goal, right? Transitioning from exploration to exploitation. And there's also a bit of time pressure to do all of this as fast as possible because every reward hit is some money for the subject, okay? Right, so now the important thing is that in every new episode, so when we transition to the next episode, everything is randomized. So it's a new maze with a new bunch of walls. It's a new hidden goal location. And it's going to be a whole new set of trials starting now. Okay. So what that means is the agent or the human cannot specialize to any single maze. We trust humans wouldn't anyway, because they know how to solve that. They don't really have to learn the task. But the recurrent neural network agents that I'll show you later will not be able to specialize to any single maze because the maze changes all the time. And also, there are just so many possible mazes that they could encounter that they really have to come up with some navigation strategy that generalizes across mazes. Okay. Right, so that's our task. It's basically a dynamic maze task. And we asked 100 human participants to perform the task in their browser. So those humans had the kind of bird's eye view on the entire maze. So they see the walls, they see where they are at any given point. The only thing that they don't see is the hidden goal by definition. And we just recorded their actions. And so they do pretty well on these tasks, as you might expect. So they exhibit one-shot learning. So in the very first trial, which is the exploration trial, they take about 11 steps to first hit the goal. This is slightly suboptimal. The optimal exploration strategy that never visits the same state twice takes just short of 9 steps to the goal on average. But then once the goal has been found, then humans very rapidly transition to an exploitation phase where they just take something like 4 or 5 steps to the goal. And that doesn't change much from subsequent trials to the next. And again, this is very close to being optimal. So humans do well. Well done, you guys. But more importantly for us, it turns out that they think quite a bit in this task. So they exhibit a broad distribution of thinking time. So what we do is we just look at response times, what we call response times, which is literally just the time that separates 2 consecutive key presses on the keyboard. Okay, so they use their keyboard to move left, right, up, or down, and the response time is just like defined as the time it takes between kind of knowing where you are and your next action. And from that response times, which is kind of the raw response time, we kind of discard. We have like a little Bayesian model to discard like sensory and motor delays, basically. And we're left with something we call thinking time, which is the part of the response time that cannot be attributed to this kind of delays. And this is a pretty broad distribution as well. So you can see that these subjects, most of the time they react very quickly, but there's also quite a few times where they take like almost half a second to make up their mind as to where to move next. Okay. So convince ourselves by looking at the structure of these things that this is not just randomly doing like dilly-dally type of behavior. There is a lot of structure in this response time, this thinking time distribution. So in particular, if you separately condition on the step within the trial, with the first step being just after you've been teleported and the first step you take. So if you separately condition on the step within the trial as well as the goal distance, the distance to goal, then you can see 2 things. The first is that humans tend to think more early on in the trial, and that's broadly consistent with them having to plan a new route at the beginning of the trial, right? And second, they tend to think more when they are further away from the goal, irrespective of where they are in the trial. Okay, and that's again consistent with having to plan a longer route, just taking more time than having to plan a shorter one. Okay, so at this stage, what we have is a task that seems to require kind of meaningful thinking in humans or meaningful patterns of planning. And so the next thing we wanted to do is to get closer to the kind of neural underpinnings of all this. And so Chris decided to go ahead and train recurrent neural networks on the exact same task. Okay, so I'll start with a very high-level overview of the network, and then I'll go on into some of the details. So in Chris's model, there is an RNN agent that has its own internal dynamics, and that receives input from the environment, and whose job is to output policy over possible actions that the agent could take. Okay, so it's basically transforming inputs into actions, right? The policy is a stochastic policy, and every single action taken by the agent will then kind of modify the environment in the sense that the agent will actually move and receive the next input. Okay. Now, Chris drew inspiration from work by Jen Wang and Zeb Kurth-Nelson at DeepMind, who had used policy gradients to meta-train these kind of RNNs on these kind of dynamic tasks. So the way it works is that they kind of gradually, so they use the policy gradient, a policy gradient algorithm called the advantage actor critic algorithm, A2C, to kind of gradually update the parameters of the agent in such a way as to make it perform better and better in the task across episodes. Okay, and this is a painstakingly long training process that involves seeing millions of different mazes. And it's called meta-training because in every single maze, the parameters of the agent are assumed to be frozen. Okay, so like they're not allowed to move within each episode. Okay, so there's no way that the agent can actually learn to explore and exploit within a single episode by modifications of its parameters, because those parameters are frozen. So what the network has to do instead is to kind of learn a dynamical strategy. It has to learn to solve the reinforcement learning problem for each maze through its own internal dynamics instead of plasticity. Okay, so in this sense, it's called meta-training. Right, so in slightly more detail, so here I have a big confession to make. This is, we use a GRU, okay? So I don't know if I have to apologize to people. Given the name of this seminar series, I think Carl would have loved to see a balanced network here, but that will have to wait a bit. So we use a GRU whose hidden state, H, kind of evolves according to this nonlinear equation here, where, you know, theta, like phi theta is basically the standard GRU nonlinear dynamics, and theta is just a bunch of parameters in the network. So the kind of internal, the hidden state of the GRU is then kind of decoded into a momentary output, and that output parameterizes the categorical policy over those four actions, left, right, up, or down. Now, the inputs that the network receives are the following. So we feed the network with information about the wall locations in every episode. So it's a fully observed environment. We make it really easy to the agent in this respect. We also feed the current location of the agent. So all of this is kind of one hot encoded. And we also give, obviously, kind of the reward signal at every step. So this is not telling the agent where the reward is, but it's telling whether or not the current state contains the reward. Okay? Because the policy is stochastic, we also make sure to actually feed back to the agent the actual action that was sampled from the policy. And finally, we also let the agent know about the elapsed time, the wall clock time elapsed since the beginning of the episode. And we work with the assumption here that every single step of recurrent processing, or equivalently every action that the agent takes 400 milliseconds of wall clock time. Okay. Great. And so the network, as I said, is optimized using policy gradients to essentially maximize a performance criterion, which is given by the total reward that you expect, you know, knowing the policy of the agent, which depends on those parameters, and on average across every possible maze that you do or environment you could encounter. Okay. Now, there's you know, this is kind of the primary training objective, but we also include secondary or auxiliary training objectives, which are to encourage the network to also estimate the value function associated with any particular state. So this is just another readout of the network's hidden states, which we train to approximate the kind of the total future reward that we can expect if we act on policy from the state we currently are at. We also train the network to maintain an internal representation of the goal location. So obviously at the beginning of each episode, the agent has no clue, but we want it to be able to memorize and permanently retain the information of the goal location after it's found it. And finally, we also train the network to be able to predict the next state, given the action it's taken and the current state. Okay, so these are kind of aspects of what we might call an internal world model, and it will become very important later when I talk about planning. For now, you can think about these things as being very useful components to kind of facilitate meta training of these RNN agents in these kind of flexible maze tasks. Okay, it really helps greatly if we encourage the network to actually build these internal models. The value function itself is actually pretty critical to denoise the gradients or to reduce the variance of the gradients that we have in policy gradients. All right, so that's all good, but you know, we can train networks like this. It actually works. This is the first thing that Chris did. But where is planning in all that? So this is where Chris had a really super cool idea. He thought, okay, what if we allowed these networks to choose when to think and to learn to use their thinking abilities to make better decisions. So he came up with a very simple modification of this model architecture that actually enabled a whole range of investigations along these lines. So what he did was he kind of, at each iteration of the dynamics, the network was in fact allowed to choose to either act physically in the world, to kind of, move right, up, left, or down, or it could also choose to think instead. It could choose to kind of leave the environment alone for a little while and just do a bit of internal thinking. So what do we mean by internal thinking? So it was instantiated as what we call a rollout of imagined actions, okay? So the network samples actions from its own policy. These are just imagined actions because they don't actually go and affect the environment. And then the network uses its own internal world model to predict the sensory consequences of these actions and to feed these kind of fake sensory inputs back to itself. Okay, and so the network can dynamically interact with its own internal model, and we let it do that for about 8 steps. Okay, exactly 8 steps, if I'm not mistaken. Except in cases where the model believes to have hit the reward on the way, in which case the rollout is aborted prematurely. Okay, so this is basically, the agent interacting with its own internal model. It might decide to imagine going right, and then thinking that, okay, if I go right, I'm going to end up in this state. And this state, I know that it is rewarded. And so then I abort the rollout. And then once the rollout is finished, then the agent feeds back onto itself all the information about the rollout, about what just happened internally. Okay, so this contains like things like actions taken, whether or not the goal was reached, and that's basically it. Okay, and then these kind of rollout feedback inputs just go into the network through separate input channels and then have a chance to influence the policy of the RNN in the next step. Okay, so the next step of recurrent dynamics will have a chance to process these rollout inputs and therefore to affect the next decision made by the agent. Which again could be to either now act physically in the world or to think again. Okay, so this is all up to the agent to decide when it wants to think and what to do with what it has just thought about. Okay, so of course the network has to pay a price for thinking, and that price is simply time, right? So it has to forego an action for the whole duration of the rollout. And here we take every single rollout to take all together. So those 8 rollout actions to take 120 milliseconds. Okay, so the agent can mentally imagine actions much faster than it can physically take them. Okay, so that's kind of one advantage of thinking, is that you can do this much faster than physically interacting with the world. But it still costs you a little bit. So you can't just do away with just imagining your life. At some point, you need to take physical actions if you want things to happen. Important life lesson here. Okay. Another thing that I want to emphasize before moving on is that these rollouts are completely internally generated. Okay, so they don't provide the agent with any new information, anything that they didn't already know before. Okay, and when you think about this, this is like a hallmark of thinking, right? When we think, we don't actually acquire any new information. We just kind of massage the information that we already have and make it perhaps available to ourselves in a slightly different form. Okay. Great. So this is kind of the basis of what we call the recurrent planning agent. We haven't quite agreed on a nickname yet, but we'll do so very soon. And then I'll basically be showing you, for the rest of the talk, I'll be showing you how the agent behaves and what predictions it makes, in particular for hippocampal replays. And then I'll show you that some of these predictions kind of excitingly are borne out in the data. All right, so we train that model on the exact same task as I showed before. And the model does pretty well. So this is the model behavior. You can see that it also exhibits one-shot learning, just like humans. It transitions from pretty efficient exploration to equally efficient exploitation in just one shot upon first hitting the reward. Now, you'll recall this graph from humans showing kind of the structure of human thinking times. Well, the model, the RNN model, exhibits a very similar structure. So it tends to decide to pause and think in very similar situations as humans do, namely early on in the trial and when further away from the goal. And in fact, there is, even when you condition on these two things, there's a bit of residual, like significantly positive residual correlation between thinking times in human and thinking times in the model. In fact, we can also study this similarity further by playing this little trick. So we can clamp the model to follow the actual human trajectories that we recorded in human behavior. Okay, and at each step along these clamped trajectories, we can ask, what is the probability that the model would like to perform a rollout? Okay, so this is kind of the probability that its policy attributes to not physically acting, but instead thinking. You can see there's like a monotonic relationship between the thinking time of humans and the probability that the model would like to roll out, having experienced the exact same history of behavior up until that point. Okay. All right, so short summary so far. What we've got is a task that seems to recruit non-trivial patterns of thinking in humans. We've trained a network model on the same task, and we've allowed the model to choose whether and when to plan internally. And it just happens that the model exhibits very similar patterns of thinking as humans. Okay, so that already sounds pretty exciting to me. But now we can really use the model to ask questions about the benefits of planning in this task. Okay, so why is it that both humans and model choose to think here? Does thinking actually help them, promote better behavior? And if so, how so? Right. All right. So to answer this, Chris performed the following experiment. So he considers each episode, then he waits until the agent first hits the reward. Okay, and at that stage, he's going to force the agent to take a specific number of consecutive rollouts. So it could be 0, 1, 2, 3 up until 15 here. Okay, so we kind of forcefully impose a set number of rollouts, and then we just look at subsequent behavior in that same trial and look at how long the agent takes to hit the goal again upon being teleported, after being teleported. Okay, and you can see that the more rollouts, the better. Okay, so the more rollouts we impose onto the agent, the more we're able to decrease this average number of steps to goal. Okay, so it seems like rollouts really do gradually improve the policy. Not only that, but they also make the model more confident. So the entropy of the policy of the agent is kind of progressively decreasing as well as we force more and more rollouts onto the agent. So probably even more basic, if we prevent rollout altogether, so we just tell the model, I'm sorry, you were trained with the ability to perform rollouts, but we're gonna not allow you to do this anymore. So if you do this, you can see the average reward drops from 7.5 to 6.5. So it's quite a big hit. And in fact, you can also, instead of completely killing rollouts, you can just kind of look at all the rollouts that were performed by an agent and just kind of shuffle their occurrences and now take a new agent and impose rollouts at those specific shuffle times. Okay, so you maintain the same overall number of rollouts, but you just shuffle their timing. And if you do this, then you can also notice a substantial drop in performance in the agent. Okay. So, at this stage, not only has the agent learned that planning is good, but it's also learned kind of when it's good to plan, right? So to really understand why planning benefits the agent, we wanted to then look at the effect that each rollout has on the subsequent on the network's policy. Basically, how do kind of covert pre-plays of trajectories affect the policy of the network? So we came to this question with a fairly simple hypothesis when you think about this. So we hypothesized that for rollouts to kind of really benefit a well-calibrated agent, well, the agent should actually try and listen to its own advice, right? So if you imagine, if you kind of mentally roll out a trajectory and you imagine it to be pretty useless in the sense that it never hit the goal, then you'd be well advised not to reproduce that same trajectory, right? So you should probably, modify your policy in such a way as to downregulate this particular outcome, okay? And conversely, if you imagine rollout, like a simulated trajectory, to be successful, then you'd be well advised to actually implement or play out this particular trajectory in your behavior. Right, so that's exactly what Chris's analysis shows here. So here he looks at the probability of, so this is the kind of the probability under the policy of the agent before and after the rollout, pre and post, the probability of physically taking the action that was the first imagined action in the rollout. Okay, so imagine here, for example, this is, turning right is the first imagined action of this particular rollout. This rollout was successful, so we're on this particular category here, and you can see that the model upregulates the probability of physically taking that action right after the rollout compared to how much it really wanted to take that action before the rollout. Okay, and conversely, if the rollout is unsuccessful, then that probability is down-regulated. Okay, so it all kind of seems pretty. It just makes sense, right? Like that's what you would expect from an agent that makes good use of its ability to plan. So the agent has learned that planning is good. It's learned that it's learned in which situations it's a good idea to plan, and it's also learned how to actually use its internal planning module to adaptively modify its own dynamics or policy. Okay, so having done all these computational modeling, we thought that let's try and see what it predicts for neural data. Okay, and in particular, the sort of things we want to test is exactly what I just said. So there's this intriguing hypothesis that the model raises that in a navigation task that requires flexible adaptation to a new environment, animals kind of mentally imagine future trajectories, think through their consequences, and let those rollouts influence the dynamics of whatever prefrontal network is responsible for decision-making downstream. Okay? So our modeling suggests that this is indeed a good strategy for flexible decision-making, and Chris wanted to directly test this in neural data. So, obviously one area of the brain that's particularly well suited for studying the neural basis of rollouts in a spatial navigation task is the hippocampus, right? So everyone here knows that when a rat is idle in a particular environment, its place cells are known to spontaneously kind of co-activate in a sequence that mimic exactly those sequences that you'd record if the animal had actually been physically navigating the same environment. Okay, so these are called replays in the hippocampal literature. And I suppose if our hypothesis is correct, then we really ought to call them pre-plays somehow, because they kind of anticipate on future behavior. So we were super lucky that John Widlowski in David Foss's lab at Caltech actually exactly did those experiments that we needed. He did experiments in a flexible maze navigation task in rats. And he very kindly shared his data with us, which then Chris reanalyzed in light of the model. So what John did was to train rats to perform a dynamic maze task, very similar to ours, with just a few differences that I'm going to highlight now. So let me run you through the setup. So the environment was a maze with a bunch of walls, and those walls were moved from session to session. So each session was essentially a new environment. And then there was a 3x3 grid of wells where rewards could potentially be hidden. Now, in each environment, one of these wells was designated as the rat's home location. Okay, and the rat knew that there's always some chocolate waiting for him there. Okay, so the rat is placed at his home at the beginning of each session, and then it's kind of teleported to another location. And the way it's teleported is because it knows that there is another piece of chocolate hidden somewhere else in one of the other 8 wells. Okay, so it just has to go and explore a little bit until it finds the hidden reward. And effectively, having done so, it finds itself having been teleported away from home. And so now it's somewhere else. And so these are called away trials. These are trials where the rat navigates away from home. Okay. Now, the rat knows that after an away trial, the only way for it to ever collect more reward is to go back home. okay? Because as I said, there's always some chocolate waiting for the rat there. And so, there he goes, happily going back home. And these are called home trials, okay? So at the end, as I said, so it starts all over again, having navigated home, then it goes again to, it's teleported somewhere else, and then kind of returns home again, okay? And as I said, the walls and the home location are randomized across sessions, okay? So notice one important thing here. Notice how these home trials are structurally very similar to the sort of exploitation trials in our task. These are situations where the rat finds itself somewhere random in a maze, and then it has to navigate back to a known rewarded location, okay? And in contrast, those away trials are useful control because they also involve the rat navigating with kind of similar statistics, but navigating to some place where it has no idea where it will be rewarded. Okay, so these actually would be very useful control in the analysis that I'll show next. Okay, so as I said, next session, everything changes again. So it's very structurally similar to our task. All right, so John recorded from hundreds of neurons simultaneously in the hippocampus from 3 different rats over 37 sessions. And Chris trained one of these Bayesian models Bayesian decoders to decode the rat's position during locomotion. So it's kind of supervised learning problem, and then use the model to infer imagined trajectories whilst the rat was idle. And in particular, when the rat was idle either at a home well or the away well. Okay, and these we call replays, consistent with the whole literature on replays. So we confirmed some of John's kind of key results, beautiful results in this neuron paper here, namely that the replays tend to go through the walls less often than chains, and that's also true in the model. So if you look at property of crossing the wall for these replays, this is less than a relevant control. And this is really consistent with replays kind of relying on a well-calibrated internal model of the environment that kind of knows where the walls are, etc. Okay, and similarly, the replays tended to over-represent the goal locations. And here I'm talking about the replays that correspond to home trials. So the replays that happen when the rat is at the blue dot here and just before it starts navigating to the home location. And you can see that the home location is over-represented in those replays compared to control. And that's also true in the model, okay? So that's actually consistent with these replays actually, following the rat's own policy, which is to want to go home, right? Right, so now we can ask the same question as for the model, right? Does the rat actually act out successful replays and avoid acting out bad ones? And so we find that indeed, the very first action in each replay, which is A1 here, is more likely to be physically taken just after the replay has finished, if the replay is successful than if it's unsuccessful. Okay, and that's the same thing in the model. And critically, this is not seen in the away trials, where again, in the away trials, in fact, how could it? Because the rat has no notion of which of those wells is rewarded, which of the away wells is rewarded before it goes and actually find it out. Okay, so of course here there's a big ambiguity that we cannot really resolve. And in particular, in the model, we have access to the probability of acting out A1 before the rollout takes place. In the rat, we have no idea what probability would the rat have taken action A1 before the rollout had it not performed the replay, right? So we don't have that luxury of having this kind of in direct access to the rat's policy. However, there's one strong prediction. I think it's very clever. So Chris thought that we could actually test another very strong prediction, which is that if the policy of the rat is dynamically improved by each replay, as our model suggests it should, and if these replays kind of happen following the rat's own policy, then the logical consequence is that each consecutive replay should become increasingly successful. Okay, so if we just look at replays that happen consecutively without any behavior in between, then we should find that these consecutive replays are increasingly likely to reach the goal location. And that's exactly what we find. Okay, and it's not a small effect, right? So it's the overrepresentation of the home location here as a function of the consecutive replay number kind of goes up, and there's something. This is something that also happens in the model. Okay, great. And another important control is that this shouldn't be true in away trials, where again the rat has no idea what constitutes a successful replay, and indeed is the case that we don't get this monotonic relationship here. Okay, so I think it's time to wrap up. Let me just kind of recap the take-home messages here. So, I've shown that a meta reinforcement learning model, like an RNN model trained with the ability to plan or to think, accounts for specific patterns of thinking in humans. So it seems like the agent really learns to use this ability properly, and indeed internally planning possible future paths kind of allows the agent to perform better in the task. Right? So in a sense, the agent has learned to trade off the benefits of planning with the temporal opportunity cost that is incurred by kind of momentarily giving up on physically interacting with the world. So I've kind of purposely refrained from allocating any specific brain areas to any of these processes, but because it's the kind of discussion time, maybe we can kind of do a tentative allocation here. So our proposal, I suppose, is that this RNN agent involves some prefrontal network that's responsible for action selection. So PFC and other kind of executive brain areas, and the PFC, or this kind of prefrontal network, would kind of autonomously decide whether or not it wants to start interacting with a world model that might live in hippocampus. Okay, and if it does decide to start interacting with the hippocampus, then it would trigger replays, and these replays would be kind of a key prediction here is that somehow what happens in the hippocampus doesn't only happen in the hippocampus, but is the fruit of kind of dynamic interactions with a world model that and with the kind of a policy that might live in the prefrontal network. Okay, so there might be kind of dynamic routing of information there between PFC and hippocampus. And then the content of the replay would be fed back, or indeed kind of modify PFC in an online fashion to modify the PFC policy and then make better actions. Right, and I've shown that hippocampal replays kind of exhibit a key signature of such rollout-based planning. Great, the paper is out on bioRxiv. Check it out if you're interested. I'm really super proud of Chris for coming up with all this. It was really very much his work. It was funded by a Gates Scholarship, I have to say that as well. I'd like to thank the organizers, David and Rand, for inviting me. I'd like to thank the audience for sticking around. If you're watching this on YouTube, thanks for your interest as well. And I'd be happy to take questions.